Welcome back to the channel. If you enjoy the video, don't forget to like, subscribe, and roll your notifications to all so you don't miss any of the demonic content. Welcome to the Demonic Spotlight, where we look at the changing face of the demonic throughout history. Our spotlight today is on a being called Leviathan. Leviathan has kind of a complicated history. In Hebrew Bible, it's not a demon, it's a sea monster, and probably something like a sea serpent, given that its name comes from the Hebrew term for twisting and coiling. Probably what we're looking at here is a reflection of other gods that were once worshipped by the Israelites or by their neighbors that have now been transformed into monstrous beings. Sea beings are particularly common in this configuration, and you may note that there are other beings, such as, for instance, Rahab, who fit the same bill. Examples include Psalm 89:10, Job 26:12, and Isaiah 51:9. This relationship can be seen in some descriptions of Leviathan as well. According to Esther Hamori in God's Monsters, Leviathan's description in Isaiah 27:1 of Leviathan as a fleeing serpent, a twisting serpent, mirrors that of the sea serpent Leviathan, who is described in the Canaanite Baal cycle with the same pairing of phrases. However, among these, Leviathan holds something of a pride of place, due to being a constant example of God's might. For instance, in Job 41, God discusses Leviathan when he's talking to Job. Quote, "Can you draw out Leviathan with a hook, or snare his tongue with a line which you lower? Can you put a reed through his nose, or pierce his jaw with a hook?" What God's really doing here is showing off. He's berating Job for questioning the fate that God has allotted to him, and proving how great he is because he's able to do all of these things to a being that's as scary as Leviathan. And as much as God represents the ordering of the universe, Leviathan is his antithesis, a primordial chaos monster. This sort of sets Leviathan up as God's opposition, and it often stands in for God's opponents in other books of the Bible. For example, in Psalm 74, the author pleads for God to hear his people in the captivity of Babylon, talks about God's ability to slay Leviathan, and then encourages God to come for his opponents in the exact same way. Yet, as Timothy Beal points out in Religion and Its Monsters, sometimes Leviathan can also be strangely sweet. In Psalm 104, we read, "How many are your works, Lord? In wisdom you made them all. The earth is full of your creatures. There is the sea, vast and spacious, teeming with creatures beyond number, living things both large and small. There the ships go to and fro, and Leviathan, which you formed to frolic there." Beal also suggests that Leviathan can function as something of a theophany, a manifestation of the divine in Job. For instance, Beal writes of Job 41, quote, "Notice how the first-person divine subject, I, me, merges with its third-person monstrous object, it. See, any expectation of it will be disappointed. One is overwhelmed even at the sight of it. There is no one fierce enough to rouse it. Who can take a stand before me? Who will confront me? I will repay him. Under all the heavens, it is mine." Andrei Orlov's Supernal Serpent deepens this theophonic nature of Leviathan even further, arguing that Leviathan is depicted across a number of sources as a reflection of God and his divine might. But it's Leviathan's nature as God's opponent that eventually gets played up in most sources. Leviathan is something of the devil before there's a real devil. In fact, when Christianity comes on the scene, authors go out of their way to associate the new devil with the ancient Leviathan. For instance, Scott Noegel points out in his article, Jonah and Leviathan, that Jesus is often understood through the lens of Jonah, as a bait which causes the dread creature to rise up and snap, luring it to its death. Yet while we often think of Jonah as being swallowed by a whale in contemporary Christianity, the term sea beast is used instead, a term which allows Leviathan to frequently lurk in the waters of Jonah's interpretation. The word drakon in the Greek, which is used in the Septuagint to translate Leviathan, is also often used of the devil, including in Revelation 12:9 and 22, both of which address the dragon that ancient serpent, who is the devil or Satan. That is, Leviathan, that ancient serpent, whom you also know as the devil. This may be an origin point for understanding the devil as the serpent in the garden as well. As K. Williams Whitney notes in Two Strange Beasts, some Second Temple Judaic sources, the time frame directly before New Testament material starts to be written, identify Leviathan as the serpent that coils around the tree of life and tempts Eve. As before, this close identification with the devil in New Testament material may lead to the devil becoming the ancient serpent that inhabits the tree. Leviathan may also have been an active element in so-called Gnostic circles as well. For instance, Origen's Contra Celsum describes an ophite diagram in which portions of the world are identified as Leviathan. Likewise, the 3rd century work, The Refutation of All Heresies by Hippolytus of Rome, or a pretender to the name, relates the tale of the heretic Justinus, who understood there to be 3 unbegotten, that is, made without sexual intercourse, principles in the universe, 1 female and 2 male. As is often the case, these principles get busy and produce children. And, as is also often the case, the female principle is the one depicted as at fault for the world's problems. Feminism at this point still has about another 16 centuries or so before it comes along. While the angels that are produced that align with the male principle are recognizable angelic beings, the maternal angels include Achamoth, Bel, Belius, Satan, and Leviathan. After the early Christian period, there appear to be precious few direct references to Leviathan. But that doesn't necessarily mean that Leviathan isn't in the ether, so to speak, but rather that it doesn't need to be called out. For example, Leviathan is a possible origin for depictions of the so-called hellmouth of medieval art. Inasmuch as Christ descends into hell to free souls, he functions again as Jonah being swallowed by the sea beast. The sea beast, though, again, is very specific. It is the dragon, that ancient serpent, called the devil. Hellmouth depictions become a popular element of medieval art from the 9th century to the late medieval period, but as the popularity of shows like Buffy can attest, the imagery still remains with us. This seems to change around the time of the Reformation. All of a sudden, we start to see notions of Leviathan beginning to pop up again. For instance, in 1531, Leviathan appears in Agrippa's 3 books of occult philosophy under his discussion of the number 2, a mark of duality and thus evil. Brian Levack indicates that Peter Binsfield, the author of the 1589 work Treatise on Confessions by Evildoers and Witches, names Leviathan as one of the 7 princes of hell. And other sources have suggested that he is associated with envy in that same book. In Loudun Possessions of 1634, Jean de Jonge claimed to be possessed by 7 demons, one of which was Leviathan. We also see a few oblique references to Leviathan. For instance, one of the most famous works of political philosophy, which contained a substantial amount of religious imaginings as well, was Thomas Hobbes's Leviathan, or The Matter, Form, and Power of Commonwealth, Ecclesiastical, and Civil, from 1651. Likewise, Leviathan doesn't so much appear in Paradise Lost as he stands in for Satan's enormous size, when Milton writes, "Thus Satan talking to his nearest mate, with head uplift above the wave and eyes, that sparkling blazed his other parts besides. Prone on the flood, extended long and large, lay floating many a rood, in bulk as huge as whom the fables name of monstrous size. Titanian or earthborn that warred on Jove, Briareus or Typhon, whom the den by ancient Tarsus held, or that sea beast, Leviathan, which God of all his works created hugest that swim the ocean stream." In present-day America, the idea that Leviathan is a demon has really taken off again. As in most situations that involve named demons, the idea here is spiritual warfare. That is, the notion that a particular demon causes people to think or feel in a way that doesn't reflect reality. Playing on the idea that Leviathan's name means twisting, and references elsewhere to it being a twisting serpent, modern Leviathan believers will often attribute to the demon the capacity to twist the words or feelings of others, dividing groups of people from one another, destroying social harmony and unity. For instance, in this discussion between Lance Wallnau and Sid Roth, Leviathan is called out as the demon in charge of fake news.
Now, we have a phenomena that everyone's talking about. It's called fake news. You know what's behind that phenomena. Clue us in.
Yeah. So I'm watching the fake. Now, I know this is a spiritual battle going on with Trump. I mean, it is clearly a spiritual battle.
But you have identified there is an ancient spirit behind this. Tell me about that spirit.
Yes, because I'm saying these manifestations in the nation, the race riots, the this riot, the that, the Berkeley, these are manifestations of demons, Sid. This is demons stirring up flesh into, and why are people so passionately and ideologically toxic over this? So here's how the spirit works. It is a world-ruling class spirit. There are spiritual principalities, powers, and rulers of the darkness of this world. This is a world ruler. It is the prince behind mind control. So when you're in like propaganda stuff like Nazi Germany or in communist Mao world, this spirit works through mind control on a mass level. And it works in order to divide people against people. So Satan knows that if he can create poor against rich, male against female, young against old, black against white, heterosexual, homosexual, the more division he can create, the more power he can consolidate. This spirit is an expert at serving Lucifer in sowing division to divide people to create new power structures. And I'm looking at that and saying 5 times in the Bible this spirit's referred to as Leviathan and it's in the water. And Lord, what is it that you're saying about the operation of this? And here's the pretty clear truth. David said, as a king, all day long do my enemies twist my words. They're my enemies without a cause. Meaning, David had political adversaries who would seize on anything he said in order to distort the meaning of it, to divide his administration.
You know what? We have all seen that happen in our life. I won't even mention the names, but 2 names that are household words in Christendom. I was at a planning meeting with them. And I made a stay. I spoke for a little bit. I sat down, and one of these 2 got up and said, I'll take what anyone says, but I cannot take what you just said. Ooh. And I'm thinking, what did I say? These are national leaders. And they said, you cannot say it is wrong to evangelize Jewish people. And I thought, that's the last thing I'd ever say. And a woman sitting next to me that I didn't even know stands up and said, he didn't say that. That was Leviathan.
Exactly.
Makes no sense whatsoever.
Exactly. Now imagine if he hadn't spoken it. He could have walked out of there.
And thought it.
And said to other people.
And gossiped.
In a closed room, I heard what Sid Roth said. Would you maybe go, oh, what this spirit does when it gets a hold of you is, it moves you almost supernaturally into angry conviction. It's not, people become radically convinced.
Isn't
they're
this
right.
what we're seeing in the fake news?
For me, it's fascinating to think about how Leviathan has transformed for people over the millennia of its existence. From God's dark reflection to the demon lord over misinformation and twisting of